I had to teach today, though.
All right. We're being recorded. So, and let me go ahead and do my attachment before we do the formal stuff.
We like having
And
lessons from your house because the internet is so good.
oh yeah, I got great internet.
Yeah.
I pay a lot for it, but I got great internet.
Actually, I
Yeah.
just noticed that you're at home.
And we have all the TV streaming, all that stuff. We got to have a good internet. Yes. Yeah, they're having electrical problems at the church. Uh, right now, I'm hearing Craig telling me they had no power there when he stopped by before he, and they had no power. So
Yeah, that
we
was
would have been,
about 24 after 4.
yeah, I can get on here, and for some reason, come on.
I see myself.
Yeah, we can see you too.
Here,
I'll
here.
close my window here.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Y'all can see the Zoom, the
Yes,
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Very good. So we're going to talk a little bit about condensing some things. This is a good time to get some final questions in. And we're going to tie up some things through chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the shortest chapter of the book. A few minutes we could be done with it technically, but with the other stuff we're trying to bring it together, I want to make sure everything gets tied in, and
Mhm.
then we kind of get this bigger picture of what's going on. Okay.
Sounds
So
good.
before we start, let's have prayer, and we'll see if I can't make some hay out of this stuff. All
Mhm.
right. Oops. Get back here. All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we can be together. We know we're having some problems there at the church, but you're with us. We're here. We're on Zoom, and we're able to finish the class. So I appreciate that you are with us, blessing us. Bless our conversation here tonight, and may your name be lifted high and praised. And may we get a picture of what Daniel's trying to show us. Thank you for the blessings, and help us as we continue with our endeavor. My prayer in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. I called this here the promise given. There's all kinds of names I could give this in the chapter, but the promise given really is the rise of Daniel. See, this is the structure of the book. Yeah, the rise of Michael, which ends with the rise of Daniel. In the middle here is this waiting for the end period, which is the longest section of the chapter. But Daniel is told to he will stand in his lot and at the end of the day. There's a promise that's made to him. And the promise is not just made to Daniel, but actually made to you and I as well. So this is the structure here. And we're going to talk about at the beginning the rise of Michael. Y'all can still see my PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
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 Hello? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I need and make sure you know feedback. So uh, and the verse starts out. The first four verses we're going to look at is the rise of Michael. The first two are here. Now at that time it says Michael, the great prince, who reigns, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, every one who's found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So Michael stands up, Michael the archangel, that we were introduced to in chapter 10 for the first time. Chapter 10 starts out with the name of Michael, and what we got here is chapter 12 is about Michael. So that Michael is the ellipse to the long war. And he's a very important character. Within Adventism, we have an understanding, but in most of Christianity, they don't see it that way. And they have a tendency to not, and which is always how the language is used, in that it's in the Bible, and yet they still want to make that emphasis about who he is. Evangelical conferences that the church experienced, the Adventist church experienced with Donald Barnhouse, a Baptist minister, and the lead speaker of the CRI, it was a radio show. He was the Bible answer man. And he was working at that time as a young man, young scholar, with Donald Gray Barnhouse, who was a Presbyterian. And the Presbyterian church there in, I guess, Boston, someplace, I forgot what city he was in. It was actually the only church that Donald Barnhouse ever pastored, technically. But he had this big radio program, a big magazine that he was sending out. And so together they worked on asking Adventists about who they were as questions. And it was a result of those evangelical meetings that the book was published called Seventh-day Adventists Answer Questions on Doctrine, published in 1957 in October. And within Adventism and the circles, when people talk about that book, they just simply call it Questions on Doctrine, or QOD. And regarding Michael, Martin had said that we should be very careful about how we approach the Adventists on this, because it's not that he agreed with us, but it wasn't as bad as what others were trying to make it sound. It seemed like Walter Martin was a little bit more level-headed, even in areas where he disagreed. So Michael is the one who rises, and we see here we go. From there, he says in verse 21, out of Matthew 24, 21, 22, it talks about distress. For then there will be a great tribulation or distress, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. So we're talking about the same time of trouble that Daniel is. He says, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So God cuts them short. In fact, some translations talk about it being cut short in righteousness. So we come to a point in history that long after the Seleucids and the Syrians and the Seleucids of Syria and the Ptolemies of Egypt had vanished. So who was the last Ptolemaic king or queen for Egypt? Anybody remember?
Cleopatra?
Cleopatra, yeah, in 30 BC. So she's gone. There are no more Ptolemaic leaders in Egypt. There are no more Seleucids up in Syria, And so the conclusion is, and this is from Bill Shea's book on Daniel, you see him in your bibliography. So we must be dealing with new powers that have taken their places. Mm-hmm. So what are these powers that make their appearance here at this time in salvation history? That's the question. This is all off the same page of the book. Daniel, he says, no final answer on this question has emerged. So however you talk to a fundamentalist Adventist, you want to be real sure and tell you they're real sure about the King of the North and everything. This thing has been debated, and not just in modern times. We're going back times when James White was alive, and he died in 1881. So no final answer to the question had emerged. This question has been debated hotly among Adventist pioneers and by Adventist teachers in more modern times. So perhaps the best we can say is that since these events are still future, we will recognize them when they take place before our eyes. And so I may talk about the King of the North and stuff, and I'll even tell you who I believe he is, but we'll recognize it when it happens. And what I want to do is set you up for this last part of chapter 11 to let you know just about what's happening there or not happening. Kind of like know where we are in the story. that Daniel's preparing, because he takes us to the end, but not quite. And we've got some things at the end of Daniel still to take care of. And so they're still open-ended today. Shea writes that the last actions of the king of the north, or the little power, took place in 1798. Remember, that's at the end of the times and half a time. That's when the papacy or the Pope had been arrested by General Berthier, who was the brother-in-law of Napoleon. And he takes him and arrests him. Now they have another Pope that replaces him, so it's not like at the end of the papacy. And they take his papal states away. Well, they're not taken away instantly. A lot of times within Adventist discourse, it sounds like the Pope lost all of his papal states that same day he was arrested away during the 1850s, years later. But we see this change taking place. The papal power was temporarily reposed through the capture of the Pope by General Berthier. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that the time of the end begins around or at this point of the end. So this is where we are in salvation history in that regards. From that point, 1798 onward, we may expect the fulfillment of the events prophesied in Daniel 11, verses 40 to 45. Those are the verses that recognize yet they must still lie in the future. Chapter 11, and we're still not at them yet. The story is still part of our experience today, not just in the past. So, Daniel 12, verses 1 to 4 has brought us beyond that point that's not completed today to when Michael stands up. And we can cross-reference this back to the judgment that's in Daniel 7, verses 8 and 9. This is the end of judgment, followed by resurrection. That's when Michael stands up, things happen. And that's what we see in those verses. And the other two verses in those first four that talk about the rise of Michael, it says, those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven. And those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Now, if you see in the lesson here, page 115, I show a little chiasm of this last section here, where many will be made spotless and refined, the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. And it's in a chiasm with no center chiasm point. It's just a standard inverse parallel. But it's focusing on the idea that the wicked won't understand, but the wise will. That's why the commentary for Daniel, Wisdom for the Wise. We see this back in chapter 2, where it's for the wise, and we see it here at the end of the book, where it's the wise who will understand.
Okay.
So, righteous things shine like the stars. Stars oftentimes refer to angels or certain figures, public figures, or the saints. The dragon in chapter 12 of Revelation swung his tail and swept out a third of the stars from heaven. Those are the fallen angels that came with him. So righteous saints here are to shine like the stars. So that's even applied to God's people. As for Daniel, he's told to seal these words up and seal the book until the end of time. And there's a point when it'll be opened, and that's at the end of time. I believe we're there yet. That was 1798 put us at the end of time. And I believe that's when Daniel began to be opened. And men begin to look up and ask. And this is when the prophecy study and the second coming of Christ really blew up at that time. In fact, it was during the 1800s when they coined the word eschatology, taken from the Greek word eschaton, which is final things. And to and fro is in the King James. And not in Adventism, I always had a problem with back in the 70s where they said, oh, that's the inventions and technology and everything, and airplanes and all that. Many will go back and forth within the text of Daniel, is what it's talking about. And knowledge in Daniel will increase. That's what Daniel's writing about there. And that's at the end when the book begins to be opened up. It's no longer sealed. Now, Revelation of the book, in fact, it was to be understood in AD. So it was still written almost 1,700 years before the opening of Daniel's sealed book, when it joined forces with Revelation and began to tell the bigger story. So the time of the end. Now, I took this from Pastor Gary. You know, he did a series on Revelation and Daniel when I came back in 98. And I came back in February of 98. And he had finished up, he was finishing up Daniel, before he did Revelation. And so I was able to kind of get some of those meetings in. And he really did kind of a nice job with both books. I could probably get you the outlines to both those presentations. And Gary, I found when looking at his outlines again today, I really appreciated Gary's scholarship. He was very organized, OCD almost, the way he would collect information and lay this out. And I think that was one of the things that I liked about him from the beginning, about how he would assemble information. And this is from him, from this outline. He's showing the time of the end throughout Daniel, where in Daniel 2 talks about it, the time of the end. And we see in Daniel 7, that's the four beasts that you saw coming out of the water. The time of the 10 toes, which is really the time of the 10 horns that we see in chapter 7. Chapter 8, we see after the 3.5 times, the times and half a time. The question is asked in verse 13, when will this end? What point? It's not looking for a time period, it's looking for a point in time. So 3.5 times is 1260 ends. It ends on the 2300th evening morning when the sanctuary has been set right or vindicated or justified. That's what the word that means. It's translated in the King James as simply cleansed. But it's not the Levitical word for cleanse that we read in the book of Leviticus regarding the cleansing of the sanctuary. It's a different word entirely. Daniel 9 speaks of the 70 weeks, which begin in 457 BC. I have in your appendix to your lesson here today an article published in the Adventist Journal of Theology by Bill Shea talking about the date 457. Mm-hmm. Giving it, helping you understand its authenticity and why that's a good date. So there's been work on that, and I think the work that's been done on it justifies the 457. The 457, of course, cut off from the 2300, and the 2300 we know ends in 1844, a date which pertains to the time of the end. Daniel 11, which is the long war, verses 31 to 39, they parallel to Daniel's 7 and 8, to the story of the judgment and the story of the ram and goat. You know, it deals with the activity of the little horn right up until the time of the end. So this is when Daniel's book gets open. And this little thing here, this is just a piece for us to look at. And wanted to get the sheet ready to
Karl,
send out. Within Adventism, we understood Jesus Christ, and the reason was used, and for many things. In the Old Testament, there's a means messenger. Now, verses that are used, we're talking about when messengers go and were sent to Gideon to gather troops. The word messenger there comes from the word Moloch. Moloch were sent to Gideon's by Gideon to gather troops. And these were human beings; they weren't angels. Uh, so the word itself carries not just about the species, but who they were, messenger. So we can have them apply to human. We can have them apply to superhuman beings, and not superhuman beings, but super beings. Period. Supernatural beings. And then we have them applied to God Himself, to Theos. For instance, the angel of the Lord in Exodus 3, the burning bush. And the angel of the Lord was, we even most all churches today understand that to be the pre-incarnate Christ talking to Moses. He was the pillar in the cloud by day and fire by night, actually. Exodus 13. Uh, that was referring to the angel there was God, not a species. Judges is full of it. Angels of the Lord at Gilgal, the Gideon and the angel of the Lord. Anytime you have angel of the Lord, that's a theophany that you're looking at. The word angel is being used with it. Angel of the Lord was Samson's parents. That's a great story, chapter 13 of Judges. First off, the wife gets it. The angel of the Lord comes to her, tells her the story, and then she tells her husband. And so they go back to the site. Manoah, her husband, asks for him to come back again, and he does. And they make him a sacrifice, which he accepts the sacrifice. Now, angels don't accept worship, but he does, and he consumes the sacrifice. And after he's gone, Manoah says to his wife, we've seen God, we're going to die. And of course, this is probably my argument for why a man needs a woman, because she was clear-headed and said, no, he told us what's going to happen, we're not going to die. And again, an angel of the Lord accepts worship there, and that's in chapter 13 there, verses 15 to 20. And these are just some things I'm pointing out here. I can get this sheet together and share it with you all. I'll just send it out to the list, and you can kind of have what Gary had put together. I'd like to get the audio. I used to back 25, 26 years ago. I took all the sheet and his sermon, and I cut out the audio section dealing with Michael and made a special CD. At the beginning, it was cassettes, and I would put them out on the table for people to have the cassette and then the sheet to go with it, so they could get that information on Michael. But we haven't messed with that in years and years.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Technology has changed.
I'll go ahead and get this sheet out so that you can have that information too. Okay? And I put it in because for anybody who's new to or not an Adventist, they can kind of get a little tempered look at it, and not think it's so strange. So it's called Waiting for the End. And one on this bank of the river and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left towards heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. The power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. As for me, Daniel says, what will be the outcome of these events? So the angel, of course, we see one is Christ, the man dressed in linen above the waters of the river. And it's for a time, and half a time when God's people are being persecuted. We saw that back in chapter 7. We saw the solution to it in chapter 8 when the angel asked that certain angel, Palmoni, when? Till when? When will this be concluded that God's people won't be continued to be persecuted? And he told him, on the 2,300 evening mornings, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So we're talking about setting God's people free, cleansing them, preparing them for a time at the end. And we've discussed that time of the end preparation was the delivering of the message out of Revelation 14, the three angels' messages. Those three angels' messages are tied with the three angels of chapter 8, verse 13, which were the last three angels to sound the trumpet, the woe, woe, woe. And so in context of God giving a message through the last three trumpets, his church is also out delivering the message of the gospel, calling about God restoring justice in an unjust world, and calling people to worship true creator God as opposed to the false God in chapter 13 of Revelation, which is the beast system. So these are really important when they fold in together. Daniel folds in with Revelation the story about what's going on. And that times, and half a time puts us at this time in salvation history when this is all coming together. And so when he said, like, as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be accomplished. Now, Daniel was confused. He didn't know what to do. But this takes us, like I said, to 1798, bringing us to the time of the end. This period is when the saints are set free to proclaim the last message during the time of the three woes in concert with God, to take back the kingdom and restore all things. Normally, we think of the trumpets as what God is doing, but we need to think of in terms of the trumpets in Revelation as not just what God is doing, but what he is also in unison with his church and what they are doing here on earth to take back the kingdom. It's not just a sideshow. We're actually part of it. And that's where we see the connection. As he gives the trumpets to cause people to look up, we give the three angels' message, the gospel, the call that God's restoring judgment, the call to restore true worship to Creator God and not false gods. So then the rest of that section, he sets up, he said, go your way, Daniel. These words are concealed and sealed up until the end time. Many will be purged and purified and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly. None of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. So from the time that the regular is abolished, remember the word sacrifice is inserted. It's not in the text. It's just the tamid, the daily, the regular. So from the time that the tamid is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,200 is he who keeps waiting and attains to 1,335 days. And this is the only time we see the 1,290 days and the 1,335. And they're both in relationship to times and half the time, the 1260. And so we're asking the question, what's really going on? Because we're at the end. We've run out of Bible text in Daniel. We have one more verse left, and it doesn't explain that. And I put a little chart in the handout, and I also did one here for the slideshow. And you can see where the 1260 is, the 1260 in the end in 1798. But we see that part of that 2,300 day prophecy. So they continue on after the 1290 to 1335, which is the eve of 1844. Just before we get to 44, he says, blessed is So this is an important time for happening. People have asked, why is it important? Why is the 2300 days important? What's being said there that's important? It's not so much the theology as it is the placement in time and space of God's people who have been delivered and shown to be just. Remember 722 of Daniel, judgment was found in favor of the saints. And we now, in time and place in history, are given this great commission to preach the gospel. This is the message for the church, but it's for especially at the end in the context of last things that we give these three angels messages, preparing to take back the kingdom and to finish out, to working with hand in hand with God to finish the work and let God restore all things. So this is really an important period of time that we're in since 1844 as the movement to give the message. It's not about denominations and institutions. I know many of my fellow Adventists are trying to make it so. We're the remnant church, they would say. We're the restorers of truth. And while there is some truth in there, I believe God raised us up just as surely as he raised up Martin Luther. But that doesn't make us the only ones that God has used and is using to give his message here on the earth. I think we were at a time and place where we were able to pick up on God's message. It's not about the movement itself, but the message of the movement. Not the remnant people as much about the remnant message. And that's the call of the three angels' messages. And that's what we're about. Verse 13 is, but as for you, Daniel, you go your way to the end, and then you will enter into rest and rise again with your allotted portion at the end of the age. This is the promise for Daniel to rest, not sweat it out, that God has everything in control. But the promise given is not just to Daniel. The promise is given to the body of Christ as well, to you and I. And as we perform our work at the end, there'll be a time when we too will lay down and rest until the allotted time is done. And so we partake of Daniel's promise. We partake of Daniel's work in finishing up this here battle that has been going on since the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We're part of that. But that's basically chapter 12. And we're just a little more than half our time dealing with those issues. If you have any specific questions that maybe have come up since I started talking, please bring them forward.
I have a question, Karl. And my question is about the 335 days.
Everybody stunned? Yeah. So you saw the chart. You see how that works out.
Yeah, I did,
So,
but I'm not
and it's
really
interesting.
understanding the 330. I
Well,
understand pretty much
it's just
everything
simply
else.
about a time period that takes us to the bridge, or to the point, or the eve of
To the end of
the
time.
44 movement. Yeah. The
Oh, okay.
one of our old evangelists, Cox, put at the end of his book on Daniel that this is a end time prophecy. It's kind of like a reapplication of a time prophecy for the end. I
Okay.
think it's misleading to try to run it as an end time prophecy after
Right.
1844. But he thought he had something, and I knew a number of pastors who were kind of really sold on to him. I had one pastor, Bill Basham, I met when he was pastor of Payson. He was up in Prescott at the time. He retired and helping to pastor the church, and he was in the conference bookstore where I worked, and he bought a bunch of Cox's book on Daniel because of that very thing. He was really sold on it. He was promoting it and everything. And he bought a lot. I think he bought that day. I think he bought 14 copies of the book.
Wow.
They were having a Bible study or something, and he was picking it up for that. But I think it's just, I don't think it was fruitful study. They're trying to make it more than what it was, and
Right.
to see it in light of what Daniel was saying.
It's part of the time prophecy then.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I
You can
get it.
see my little chart. My little chart is actually filled out. If you get Leroy Fromm's book, The Movement of Destiny, which came out in 72, came out around 72. It was just before I was going, about the time I was going to academy. And so they show a chart on the inside back page near the back of the book. I think it's on the cover itself. And they show a time chart. And in there, you'll see how they've inserted the end time, 1335, etc.
So question, Carl, about that 1335. When does it start and when does it end?
Well, if you recall the meeting, my little chart, the 1335
508.
is yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The 1290 and the 1260 end at the same time, 1798. So if you begin the 1335 with the five with the 1290.
Well, I guess my question is what event is that? At, when
Well, well, this the year before 1844.
okay.
The event. So it's not taking you to the event. It's taking you to the eve of it, taking you right up to just before it occurs.
Well,
43.
what happened then though?
Well, he says, blessed are those who come to that day. So if we are blessed coming to that day, that means we will be a witness to what happens in 1844.
And what was
the
the
release
starting?
of God's people and the beginning of preaching the three angels'
Okay,
message.
but what was the starting date for what was the event that happened on the beginning of that 1335?
Well, others have said it was the Franks in Europe when they began to form what would be present day France. That happened in 508, but it's just simply 30 years before the 538 date of the last of the three horns that had been ripped up by their roots.
Okay, because
The Apagaus.
I was thinking the 1335 started when Clovis, the King Clovis became Catholic.
Yes.
Well, well, Catholic, yeah, because they were all Catholic. Yeah, that's the Franks.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the Franks, and what would be present. The first modern state was France, and that was probably around the beginning. By 300 years later, in 800 AD, on Christmas Eve, King Charles or King Karl had been crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor
Okay.
of the Holy Roman Church. And so this was all. France was very much steeped in this thing. That's why France took the kingdom, took the papacy out of Rome and brought it to Avignon there in France. And, you know, this is where papacy's us. It's ours. They took it out of Rome. And it was out of Rome for a long time. And that's why during the fight, the Christian church, you had two popes, one at Rome and one in France. And then when they would make peace, well, they weren't going to accept each other's popes, so they had a third pope. You know, and that's how Jan Hus. That's how Jan Hus got burned to death because they were trying to make peace by coming back to one pope. And so they had promised him safe journey, a safe passage, and they didn't. They ended up burning him in the fire. So, yeah, it takes you up to the eve, right up to 43, which is right after that would be the fulfillment of the 2300 days, which would be the releasing of God's people. Freedom. They were saints set free. And now we're free to give the message, that last message. That's what we're really all about. So let's see here.
I thought it was interesting that when the 1798 came along, that was at the time of the French Revolution.
Yeah.
basically, going into atheism and secularism and so forth. And that France was involved at both 508 and 1798. It was just fascinating that the role that the France played in all that.
Yeah, they embraced Catholicism and then they revolted against it at the end.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the Les Miserables play and book and everything, which was the story of all that, it kind of takes on new meaning, which is interesting. Yeah.
I don't know what happened to Karl. He's doing something.
Yeah, there's been some interference on my end. Is anybody else hearing that?
I heard him break up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
Same here.
I thought it was also interesting that in Daniel it said that in chapter 12 there about those who die before the second coming, that really that's a blessing because they didn't have to go through the difficult times of the very end.
Yeah, the tribulation.
Mhm.
I remember reading in Isaiah that a part where he said it may be that God is being merciful by letting some people not suffer through
Yeah,
good
exactly.
things.
I
Yeah.
think there's a statement of Ellen White's where she says that God in his mercy will lay to rest um, many, who would not physically be able to go through that time. But that's similar to what happened before the flood. Those who helped build the ark, some of the old patriarchs also, um, ended their lives before the time of the flood because it was more than they could endure.
Yeah, that's good.
Hmm.
So did Karl go away forever?
No, he's still on. I can see his picture.